Well, thank you all for joining us today. We're going to go over the 2024 VLCF, Virginia Land Conservation Foundation grant round information. My name is Sue Bobolkaya, and I'm the Land Conservation Manager here at the Department of Conservation and Recreation. I'm going to just present a very brief overview and then hand it over to Gina and Becky to go over the additional scoring criteria. And then you're going to hear from our agency experts about the 5 grant categories, and we'll take questions at the end. But if you have a question along the way, feel free to share it in the chat, and we'll try to get to it as we go through the different categories. This year, we have another record amount of funding available for the grant round. We've rolled in $1 million of interest to the money that was provided by the state budget, and we have over $500,000 in return grants that will get rolled into the category from which they were originally awarded. And so we have a breakdown of those funds there for the 5 categories. Eligible entities to apply for the grants for the permanent protection of land include state agencies and local governments, as well as state and federal recognized Indian tribes, and land trusts and other nonprofits that qualify as a holder under the Virginia Conservation Easement Act. The grant program does require a 50% match for nonprofits and localities. We do have a link provided there to share some other funding sources. The other state agencies and the federal government have some available funds, record funding as well, for land conservation. So you can check out that page for any additional funding sources for your projects. In your applications, we do require that the project be site-specific, provide, aerials or maps clearly delineating the boundaries of the project. Any nonprofit application has to have a public body partner identified so that an open space easement can also be recorded on the project. Grant payments are made at the end of the project should you be awarded a grant. So we only pay the grant award once the legal documents have been recorded, protecting the land in perpetuity. We can forward the funds to the closing agent or reimburse after the fact. All of the rules for the grant program are in our grant manual that can be found on the VLCF webpage. Please read through it and look at all of the appendices, especially look at Appendix B. We have each of the 5 categories scoring sheets laid out, as well as the additional scoring criteria. And you can see that each category is a maximum of 100 points, but the additional scoring is up to 82 points now. So that can really make or break whether or not your project gets funding. And then also look at Appendix D. We have some required language for minimal protections for all projects, such as riparian buffers and other conservation requirements. So please make sure the landowner is willing to comply with those minimum standards. Okay. Again, this year, we're using the Web Grants grant portal. It's an online application process. We have the link here. We also have the link and helpful information and guidance documents on the VLCF webpage. Please contact us or any of the agency folks listed in the grant manual with any questions that you have as you work through your applications. And please follow the directions and adhere to the page limits. As you work through your application and the grant manual, please, if you feel your project is eligible for a secondary category, indicate that in your application and include all of the information needed to score that secondary category. The past few years, we've had extra money in a category, and we've had to go back and look to see what the secondary categories were. So that helps make funding go farther, and it could also be a difference as to whether or not your project gets funding. Be sure to address all the criteria, the primary category you choose, the secondary, and all of the additional scoring criteria as well. Let's see, we've got applications due August 28th, so you've got a couple of months to get your projects ready. If you want any help, just contact us. Our interagency task force will be scoring the applications, and you'll be hearing from most of them in the following categories. So again, please look at the scoring sheets in the appendix and score your application based on those scoring sheets. And be sure that your application has all of the information to get the maximum points for your project. If you do promise to do more to get more points, like here's an example, if you promise 100-foot forested riparian buffers along a river, then we'll need that language in the final recorded deed to get your funding at the end. And so make sure the landowner is willing to do whatever you promise in the application. And that's it for the general overview. There's a lot more, but it's all in the grant manual. And now I'm going to hand off to Gina, and she's going to help go through the additional scoring criteria.
All right, thanks, Sue. I'm Gina DeChico, a land conservation specialist here at DCR. As Sue mentioned, there are 10 additional scoring criteria questions with 82 points, which is pretty substantive. The first is for a Virginia Outdoors Plan identified need. So for that, we ask that you go to the current VOP that is in place. Note that there is a new one that will be out soon, but since that one is not officially approved, we're still relying on the same one that you might have looked at last year when working on this. So our first additional scoring criteria question is for VOP identified need. Again, this is looking at the current VOP that's in place. And when you identify a need from it, we're asking for you to choose the specific need that is being filled with your project. So please provide us with the specific information there. And you can get up to 3 points for this category or for that criteria. The second one is the nature-based recreation access model, which you can find on our Natural Heritage Data Explorer, or NHDE, as we call it. You can see where to find that within the different layers on the left there. And we award points for both terrestrial and aquatic need. You can get up to 3 points for a moderate, high, or very high need in both of those categories, or 1 to 2 points or less. Water quality benefit. So we require 35-foot riparian buffers on perennial streams, rivers, shorelines, and water bodies on all of the easements. But if you go above and beyond, then you can get up to 11 additional points. And we refer to the USA topo maps for determination of what is perennial. So you can pull up that base map in the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. And then depending on what sort of cover you require in the buffer, if it's at least 50% forest canopy, you get additional points. And then the amount of buffer width will also drive how many points you get. So If it's at least 50% forested, then you get 4 points for that. And then for every 50 feet wider that your buffer is, for up to 1,000 feet of water frontage, you can get 2 points. That's a confusing way of wording that, but
The
basically,
maximum, yeah, of 11 points, right?
yes, for the across, if you add up all of this for this particular criteria, so. Protection of cultural resources. So this is one that you can be kind of creative with even, you know, we're talking about a variety of historic resources could be considered for this. Remnants of burial sites, you know, integrated schoolhouses, historic wharfs, tobacco barns, gold mining pits. There's a variety of historic resources that you could claim here. And we ask that you not only identify the resource and explain the resource, but also provide draft deed language for how that resource will be protected. Because in order to get points for this category, we need to ensure that the resources are protected. If you will protect additional conserved Virginia values outside of the conserved Virginia layer that is primary to your category, then you can get an extra 2 points per conserved Virginia layer. And again, we'll ask you to state how you will protect the resources within that conserved Virginia layer. So you can get up to 12 points in this category. Wildlife values. I'm actually going to turn this slide and the next slide over to Becky Gwynn from DWR to speak to these 2 slides.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. Good afternoon, everyone. The wildlife value additive category is not different than it has been in the past. So this is the opportunity for you in an application to help us understand how your acquisition project will benefit wildlife habitats, wildlife and habitats for a maximum of 10 points. And we do that by asking you to identify wildlife that may be present or could be present on the site, and habitats that would be protected by your acquisition project. You can see at a very, at a very basic level, you can secure 1 point for each of those. If there's an intersection or a likely intersection of your acquisition project with species of greatest conservation need, or state or federally listed threatened and endangered species, or habitats that support them, you can see you get additional points for that, up to a total of 9 points. And then there is an additional point that can be awarded if you provide directly a statement that there is public access on this property to view, hunt, or fish for wildlife. And we want to see that specifically spelled out. I know there's another scoring element that speaks to the availability of the property, numbers of days that it's open to the public. But here we're really looking at a focus on a target recreational activity that is focused on wildlife. And we have our online database through the DWR website that can help you screen these particular assets into your project area. And if you need assistance, feel free to give me a call or send me an email. And then I think, Gina, if you'll go on to the next one, this is a new category. So new for this year is a total of 10 points that could be awarded for your grant application about the project's intersection with and protection of identified wildlife corridors. So at the beginning of this year, we finalized the Virginia Wildlife Corridors action plan. And as an aspect of that, there have been identified wildlife corridors, which on this map here are shown in the dark green, and buffers that help support and secure those corridors. And this is really an effort to look at maintaining connectivity across the state for wildlife to move across the landscape. These data are available on the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. The corridor action plan itself is available through the DWR website. And so similar on the Natural Heritage Data Explorer, you can do intersections of your project footprint with these corridors and buffers, just like you do with the Conserve Virginia data layers and other resources available through that. So the scaling of points is based on the percent intersection of the project footprint with buffer or corridor, and to receive the points, you must identify in your proposal how you intend to maintain the integrity of the corridor or that related buffer.
Great, thank you, Becky. As she alluded to, you also get points for public access for your project. Up to 10 points for full public access, 365 days a year, down to just 2 points for visual access of the property. Then we award points for underserved communities, up to 10 points. And we recommend using the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences Social Vulnerability Index. And when you log on to the viewer on the VIMS website, we ask that you search for here where it says the Social Vulnerability Index score. That will give you a specific numeric value. And we award the points based on that value, with up to 10 points for high social vulnerability and 5 for moderate social vulnerability. And you're also welcome to use a different model for this if a different model would better serve you. You know, there's a trust for public land model. There's the EPA has a model. So you can search different ones and see what shows the greatest need for your project and then share that information with us here. And then the last additional scoring criteria is the ratio of match to total project cost. So if you're providing a larger percentage of the match, then you can get up to 3 points extra in additional scoring points. Are there any questions about the additional scoring criteria? If so, you can either hop off mute and just chime in, or if you want to put questions in the chat, I'll pull that up so we can check now, and then we'll also try to check between each of the presenters, maybe just to make sure that questions aren't getting lost.
Okay, great. Do we see any questions? Thank you, Becky. All right, so next is Jenny Harris from Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Jenny, are you able to share your screen, or do you want us to?
Yes, ma'am. I think I can do it.
Oh, great.
Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So thanks, Sue. I'm Jenny Harris. I'm at the Virginia Department of Ag and Consumer Services. And so I'm going to be presenting on the farmland preservation category. So this category is a single funding category. I think at one point in the history of the program, it used to be farmland and forests. That was before my time, so it's its own category now. And we evaluate applications based on several land characteristics and criteria. There was a recent change made this year to provide additional support for applicants who have purchase and development rights programs. And the applications will be evaluated according to the following criteria. So for a total of 100 points, in category 1 is land evaluation at 35 points. This is where the change was made, so I'll go over that in a bit. Category 2 is land use at 45 points, and category 3 is the Conserve Virginia layer at 20 points. So in category 1, this is where we took some points and we moved it into category 2. This is soil productivity. For this one, category, you're going to take the soil survey information and calculate the percentage of the project land that's in each soil class. More points are awarded for prime, unique, and statewide importance soils. And the points awarded are based on the combined percentages. So if you have 30% prime farmland, 20% unique for your project, it's 50%, and you can multiply it by 20 to get your 10 points. The change was we took 5 points from this category and moved it to land use to support the local PDR programs. And this is just the web soil survey screen. If you have questions about how to use that, I'm sure we can help you out. I've used it before. But essentially, I think it's just you're gonna, highlight your area of interest, and it'll show you the percentages. So the second element of this category in land evaluation is parcel size. We use the latest U.S. Census of Agriculture, which is the 2022 version. I put some links on here to the site, but I took a snip of what we're really looking for here. And essentially, you'll just go into your county and compare the average size of the farm in Virginia to the size of your county to the size of the property that you're submitting. If you have questions about how to go about that, I can help as well. So the second category is land use. In the first section, it's current use and status of the land. The two things we ask about is the land currently being farmed, which is 4 points, and is it a century farm, which is an additional 4 points. But something I wanted to note is that the Office of Farmland Preservation is being transferred to the Department of Forestry in the next fiscal year. So this might not be the best website. I'm sure your property owner will know if they're a century farm and can provide that. But some of this information might change, and it might be at Department of Forestry. Hopefully we'll be able to link everything together, but I just wanted to make that note in case anybody gets confused. The next element of this category is proximity to other conserved lands. This is going to be in the Natural Heritage Data Explorer, is that what it's called? And essentially, I think you're able to input your property and be able to tell it from that. And so that's it for 10 points. The next one is vulnerability ranking. This is also with the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. There are class 2 to class 5. You receive 2 points each, like going up. And so you can take a look at that. Basically, more development pressure equals more points for your project. Another element of the land use category is best management practices. You can receive points for both voluntary best management practices and those through a state or federal conservation plan for 4 points. And additional points are awarded for specific conservation plans developed by either soil and water conservation districts or NRCS. And then you can receive an additional 3 points for nutrient management plans. The last element in this category is in land use, and this is where the change occurred in local farmland policy. So the original points in this category was for demonstrated support of farmland protection policies, including a comprehensive plan, ag zoning, ag and forestal districts, and land use taxation. But the new element of this is if the landowner is working with a local PDR program, we've awarded additional points there. In the final category for the farmland preservation is the Conserve Virginia agricultural layer. And it's simply what percentage of the property is included within the layer. And so if 60% of the property falls under this, you just multiply it by the amount of points to get your points. Sorry, I kind of blew through that, but if you have any questions, please reach out. Like I said, a lot of the Office of Farmland Preservation programs are being transferred to Department of Forestry, but I can still answer questions. I think I'll still be ranking and reviewing for VLCF for a little while at least.
Thank you, Jenny. That's great. Great. Next, Amanda Sheps will be presenting the forest land category.
Yes, thank you, Sue. This is Amanda Sheps, and hopefully you are going to be seeing my screen. Let me know if you can see it now.
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you.
excellent. All right, happy to talk a little bit about the forest land preservation category this afternoon. We have 8 criteria that are considered in this application category, and I'm going to go through them one by one, but you can see here to get a sense of which of the criteria earn the greatest number of points and get a sense of where our priorities are. Okay, so to walk through an application in this category, we have an example project, and we're going to see how it scores using all of the different tools to assemble one of these applications. So we're going to consider a potential 500-acre property that is 450 acres of forest, and 400 of those acres are high forest conservation value, and we can talk a little bit about what that means in a moment. And 63% of this total property falls within the Conserve Virginia layer. The amount of watercourses has been estimated, and its proximity to a wildlife management area is also included. And this property owner has worked with a forestry professional to develop a forest stewardship management plan and has implemented the recommendations in that plan. So there's 2 levels of consideration relative to the involvement of that property with ongoing forest management. And this landowner is willing to conserve permanently 375 acres of the existing forest on the property, which is going to be 75%. Okay, so the first method, or the first criteria that is considered, is the total property acreage. And you can see here the method by which that acreage is converted to a score. And the greatest number of points in that category is 10. This property at 500 acres is going to get 4 points at that size. And then the second element that we're going to look at is what percentage of the property is forested, and the maximum amount of points that can be earned for that criteria is 20. In this instance, 450 acres of forest on a 500-acre property is going to yield just over 8 points. And then the third category is the data layer that the Department of Forestry contributes to the Natural Heritage Database mapping, which is called our Forest Conservation Value layer. And so this information can be gotten from the Natural Heritage Database, or you can also download that information at this link, which is also maintained by DCR. That can be downloaded here, and then you can use it in your mapping for both the VLCF application or also any other easement projects that have a forest component that needs to be described in an easement deed. But going back up here, when we are from the perspective of the Department of Forestry, when we're talking about high forest conservation value, we're considering the forest that is ranked 4 or 5 to have that high forest conservation value. I have seen some other easement holders will sometimes include level 3 in their description of high forest conservation value, but for the purposes of VLCF scoring, we're looking at the percentage of the property that ranks 4 and 5. So the maximum number of points that can be earned for your high forest conservation percentage of the property is 15. And in the instance of our example property, that is 400 acres out of the total of 450 acres yielded 5.2 points. Okay, and then this is, again, this can be something that can be estimated by utilizing the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. You can bring in your shapefile and you can do an estimate of what appears to rank 4 and 5. Alternatively, I would recommend downloading the data from DCR and getting a more accurate count of those of a more detailed and accurate GIS calculation of what that score should be. All right, the next criteria that we look at is the contribution of this property to water quality overall, and we take the measurement of the streams that are on or adjacent to that property. And you can get that data a couple of different ways. You can go to this map viewer online. Alternatively, you can again download the National Hydrological layer that is at this link. And this is data specific to Virginia. One thing to, and going back to this example property that had just over 6,000 linear feet of streams, that could have earned a possible maximum score of 15, but in this example, it earned just over 6. One thing to keep in mind is that when we are talking about streams at the Department of Forestry, and we're talking about, we don't double count the riparian wetland layer and the streams, it's one or the other. So when you're talking about stream lengths, try not to double estimate what might be try not to include in that the sloughs through wetlands and those types of areas. So it's like we include that, we calculate that as wetlands. All right, so here is where this tool, how this tool can be found on the Natural Heritage Data Explorer website, or alternatively, the way I was showing earlier, where the data can be downloaded and you can do this yourself in your own GIS. All right, the 5th quality that we look at is adjacency to other conserved lands. And a project will receive points for any adjacency up to, or any proximity up to 5 miles. Over 5 miles does not get any score, but this example that we're using, this property was half a mile from a wildlife management area, which does count, obviously, and so it earned 4.5 points out of a maximum of 5. Okay, a forest management plan prepared by a professional forester, and this can take a couple of different forms. Frequently, landowners will work with the Department of Forestry to have one of our field staff develop a forest stewardship management plan. Obviously, you can also work with a consulting forester, but sometimes there are plans that we will use as also we will consider as a forest management plan. There's one developed by NRCS called CAP 106. So if you have a plan on a particular project that may not be exactly titled Forest Stewardship Management Plan, it might not be developed by the Department of Forestry, we can take a look at that and let you know whether it would meet our standards. If you have a plan and you are implementing the recommendations in the plan, that's a maximum of 5 points. If you have a plan, which is a great first step, we're happy to award 3 points, but without a plan, there are obviously no points. this property did, and they were implementing it, so they did get 5 points. Okay, the seventh category that we look at is the willingness of a landowner to conserve a certain percentage of the existing forest, and we like to see a minimum of 75%. In this case, the maximum that can be earned in this criteria is 10 points. This property owner was doing 75% of their existing forest cover, and that yielded a score of 8.3. And then the final category, or the final criteria that we look at in this category, is whether or not the property falls within the Conserve Virginia Ag and Forestry category. And in this instance, the property that we're looking at as an example, 0.63 of the acreage was within Conserve Virginia. And so by this calculation down here, it did get a score of 12.6, and there's a maximum score of 20 in this criteria. So in our example property, out of a total possible 100 points, this property scored 54.
Great.
Okay, just a couple more details that this is a really highly competitive category. And if you are going to use the Natural Heritage Data Explorer to estimate things like stream lengths or high forest conservation value, you might get slightly different scores than we will when we do it, running it a different method. So if there's questions about that, I'm happy to answer them as applications are being put together. Sometimes there can be discrepancies in the way some of the data can be understood. So if you can show real world on the ground facts that are contrary to what shows up in the mapping, we're happy to consider that as well. We also encourage applicants to look to see what elements of their property might be eligible for consideration under a secondary category. That has been really beneficial to applicants in the past. And obviously, we would encourage a complete application, and we're happy to help you achieve that. If you have any more questions, please reach out to me here, and we'll try to walk you through it.
Thanks, Amanda. I did see one question came up in the chat, wondering if there's a minimum acreage for the forest land preservation category. I think our manual says 20 acres is the minimum. Is that correct?
I believe that is right. And I think that the property size is one of the more important criteria that earns 10 points. So obviously a larger property might be more competitive, but 20 acres is the minimum.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank
Pleasure.
you.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Amanda. Right, next up, Carrie Richardson with the Department of Historic Resources is going to present on historic area preservation.
All right, thank you, Sue. I'll try to get my window up.
Yep.
Oh, just
Take your time.
All right, can you see my slides now?
Something's coming up. Hold on. Yep. Yes.
Okay, here we go. As
Awesome.
Sue said, my name is Carrie Richardson, and I am the Easement Program Specialist at the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, and I am pleased to present the Historic Area Preservation Category criterion. This round, we have over $2.8 million in the Historic Area Preservation category, so we're looking forward to a lot of great applications. For those frequent flyers in the Historic Area Preservation category, please know that none of the criteria have changed in the last year, so continue on with those great applications and keep them coming. Before I delve into the details, I wanted to state up front what makes a strong application in the Historic Area Preservation category. Strong applications to protect one or more historic resources that are listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register or formally determined eligible for listing on the VLR within the last 5 years, or located on a Civil War, American Revolutionary War, or War of 1812 battlefield. And these historic resources retain a high degree of historic integrity and relate to Virginia's culturally diverse history and/or have special community significance related to its history and are included in the Conserve Virginia Cultural and Historic Preservation layer. Just this a little bit, okay. Like the 2023 grant round, this year the Historic Area Preservation category has 8 criteria. The first criterion is historic significance, and this can be broken down into 3 sub-criteria. So bear with me. First, the property is listed on or eligible for the Virginia Landmarks Register. If the property is listed individually on a VLR or is a contributing resource to a historic district listed on the VLR, the project will receive 25 points. If the property is not listed on the VLR but has been determined eligible by DHR staff for listing on the Virginia Landmarks Register within the last 5 years, the project will receive 20 points. Please know that VLR eligibility determination is made through DHR's process for evaluation and listing on the VLR. For more information on this process, please feel free to reach out to me. And if a property is eligible for listing on the VLR, official listing may be required for properties awarded funding under this section. And I want to emphasize may. And finally, if you have any questions regarding the listing status, again, please feel free to reach out to me. And okay, on to battlefields. If the historic resource or property is located on a Civil War, Revolutionary War, or War of 1812 battlefield, the project will receive 25 points. The battlefield or site must be identified with a priority rating in one of the following reports administered by the National Park Service's American Battlefield Protection Program. First, the report on the nation's Civil War battlefields, and or second, report to Congress on the historic preservation of Revolutionary War and War of 1812 sites in the U.S. Again, if you're uncertain if your property falls within the boundaries of a recognized battlefield, please give me a call. Happy to look that up for you. And finally, the last part of the historic significance criterion is integrity. Integrity is defined as the ability of a property to convey its historic significance through attributes such as location, setting, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and/or association. If a property has a high degree of historic integrity, the project will receive 5 points. So the maximum score for criterion number 1 is 30 points. Criterion number 2 is underrepresented communities and resources with a maximum score of 10 points. One of DHR's goals is to improve the underrepresentation of Virginia's diverse communities for the purposes of historic preservation. A project will receive 5 points if it includes documented resources representing Virginia's culturally diverse history, such as places associated with people of color, the Reconstruction era, the Civil Rights Movement, African American, LGBTQ, Asian American, Latino, Hispanic, Native American, and women's history. And a project will receive an additional 5 points if the property or area includes special significance related to its community history, regardless of formal documentation. Okay, come on. The third criterion is threat with a maximum score of 10 points. Properties currently on the market for sale, threatened by development, in an estate being settled, or in imminent danger of demolition will receive 10 points. If a property is currently or was recently within the past year for sale, is currently vacant or unoccupied or significantly deteriorated and in need of immediate preservation, it will receive 5 points. We do require documentation of the above threats, and that can include things like real estate listings, a recent will or other title documentation, a subdivision plan, and/or photographs showing the poor condition of the property. If we do not receive supporting documentation, no points will be awarded. And please note that failure to provide threat documentation is the most common mistake by grant applicants and can result in a loss of significant points. Criterion number 4 is the use and treatment of historic resources and property. The maximum score for this criterion is 10 points. Here we want to know if the applicant's future uses of the property include appropriate care and treatment of the historic resources and/or the historic landscape. The applicant will receive 5 points if their plans for future uses of the property are appropriate and consistent with historic resource stewardship and protection. And the applicant will receive 5 points if their plans for the treatment, alteration, and maintenance of the historic resources on the property are acceptable and generally consistent with historic resource stewardship and protection. And if the applicant provides no future plans for the property, they will receive, and the treatment of historic resources, they will receive no points. If you have any related reports, plans, or studies detailing your future plans for the property and/or the historic resources, we strongly encourage you to submit them with the application. And all proposals must be consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for treatment of historic properties. And if you are unfamiliar with these standards, again, please do not hesitate to reach out. Criterion number 5 is historic resource protection. The maximum score here is 10 points. Here we're looking to see that the applicant has reviewed and understands DHR's easement template and how the easement protections will be applied to the applicant's property. If you need a copy of DHR's easement template, please, again, reach out to me at your earliest convenience and I will be happy to provide you with a copy. If, after reviewing DHR's template, applicants have any questions regarding the template and its protections, again, please give me a call. Our objective here is to gauge the degree to which the applicant is willing to preserve all historic resources on the property in perpetuity in accordance with DHR's easement template. A project will receive 10 points if their proposed easement terms and restrictions provide comprehensive protections for the historic resources on the property and are specifically consistent with the DHR template. Or if an applicant's terms are just generally consistent with the DHR easement template, the project will receive 5 points. Applicants must attach a summary of their proposed restrictions to be included in the easement. Please, please, please do not attach a copy of our template. We know what the template looks like, so we want to know that you understand it and have read through it. Our 6th criterion is adjacency to conserved lands. If a property, and this is determined through DCR's Natural Heritage Data Explorer. If a property is immediately adjacent to other conserved lands, like the example on the left, the project will receive 5 points. If a property is within the viewshed of or in close physical proximity to the significant historic resources and/or existing conserved lands, like the example on the right, the project will receive 3 points. And finally, if the property is not within the viewshed of or in close proximity to significant historic resources and/or existing conserved lands, but represents a unique cultural resource within a geographical area, the project will receive 1 point. Criterion number 7 is furthers public interest with a maximum score of 5 points. For this criterion, we are looking to see if and/or how a project promotes research, education, community outreach, or heritage tourism. So if a project includes specific plans for programs that further public interest, the project will receive 5 points. If the project just includes general plans for promoting public interest, the project will receive only 3 points. And if there are no plans included with the application, then the project will not receive any points. Applications that conserve resources associated with underrepresented communities and provide public education opportunities to share untold stories and advance social equity are particularly encouraged. And our last criterion is Conserve Virginia. The maximum score in this criterion is 20 points. Here we want to know if the property is located within the cultural and historic preservation layer of Conserve Virginia. If the property is entirely within the cultural and historic preservation layer, like the example on the left, the project will receive 20 points. If the property is partially within the cultural and historic preservation, like the example on the right, DCR will measure how many acres are within the layer, determine the percentage of the property within the layer, and then multiply that by 20 to calculate the final points. In this example, the property on the right is eligible for 11 points. And finally, I just want to go over the easement requirement briefly. Property owners must offer to convey a perpetual historic preservation and open space easement on the property to the Virginia Board of Historic Resources. A separate DHR easement application is required, but may be submitted after the VLCF grant awards are announced. DHR's easement application requires a number of supporting documents, including a title search back to 1940, a title insurance policy for the VBHR's easement interest, and a recent, within 1 year, boundary survey. These expenses may be included in your VLCF grant budget. The VBHR will determine whether to accept the easement offer based on established criteria and policies governing DHR's easement program. In rare occasions, the board has agreed to allow an alternate easement holder, but that, again, very rarely happens. And if the property is determined eligible for listing on the VLR, again, a formal listing on the VLR may be required. And finally, easement properties are required to be open for public access a minimum of 2 days per year. And that is my presentation on the criterion. Yeah, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And here you have all my contact information as well as some important resources on DHR's website.
Thank you, Carrie. Are there any questions for Carrie? I don't see any in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Next up, Rob Evans with DCR's Natural Heritage Program is going to present on the Natural Area Preservation category.
Can you all hear me?
Yep, thanks, Rob. Yep.
Is anyone on the call considering or contemplating a natural area application?
Nobody's raised their hand.
Okay, would you like me to go through it, Sue?
Becky raised her hand.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you've got a couple now.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, well, I'll just go ahead then. For the natural area category eligibility, I'll just point out that the Code of Virginia is relevant in a couple places, not just the grant manual. And that's both the Natural Area Preserves Act, which I've mentioned here, but also, of course, the original Land Conservation Foundation enabling legislation, which for our category has a specific section that's cited there. We'll start with the Natural Area Preserve Act that was passed in 1989, and it gives this overarching mission to the department, which I think you can see there, preserving the natural diversity of the biological resources of the Commonwealth. And so that's technically, that could be construed as everything that hopefully you see on those pictures that I'm bringing up there, including up to the approximately 35,000 different species of things that we know of living in Virginia naturally. But the law gave the department the authority, as you can see there, to acquire property for natural area preserves. Those could be purchased, leased, or otherwise acquired. And in a way, the acquisitions that could come through VLCF natural area category is one of those forms. And it also asked that the program, the Natural Heritage Program, selects and nominates the areas that have natural heritage resources that can be acquired and dedicated as preserves. Importantly also, since everything hinged in this law on the presence of natural heritage resources, it's convenient that the law also asks the department to also produce an inventory of those statewide, where things were found and their so-called ecological status. And so accordingly, the Division of Natural Heritage has deep biological foundations within our staff here. We have taxonomic experts in a number of areas that are poorly represented in really anywhere else in the state, in some cases the world, whether that be karst creatures or botany, things like that. So our staff have found a number of new things to science and new things to the state. The two plants in the middle of those photographs, those are examples of that. The top one was named as a new species to science, found in 4 locations in the valley, and the one on the bottom was discovered by one of our staff that is found in just 4 places in the world. We're also doing things like inventorying bees, and everyone seems to be into those these days, but no one had before us really worked on that in a systematic way. So that just gives an example of the types of inventory that we are performing as a means to develop a list of what the heritage resources are. The program has a focus on rarity, and the reason for that is stated up there on my slide, that the rarest elements of biodiversity deserve special attention, as they present the fewest opportunities to ensure their conservation. So the 2 generic maps that I presented there, you obviously could tell, at least in a worldwide scale or a North American scale, the thing on the left that has those little shaded counties represent where that particular species is found. So that could be conserved in any of those counties, and in many of them in multiple locations, whereas the thing on the right has many fewer opportunities to conserve it. And you can see there, if you look at the map, that Virginia has kind of a disproportionate share of the total range of that species. So that's one type of rarity that we would consider. And then at the state level, here's the same kind of maps. The thing on the left, you can see there, it only has about 5 counties in its known range, whereas the thing on the right has a host of them. So that also gives us a suggestion of which one deserves the most attention. And rather than just kind of eyeballing this, I won't go deep into this, but we have a standardized ranking methodology that accounts for how common or rare something is at a global scale and how common or rare it is at a state scale. And that's done in a standardized way using data from other states around the country as well. And so when we have all that data, we maintain it also per the Code of Virginia, where we were asked to told to maintain a natural heritage data bank. And you've heard a little bit about already the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. So that Data Explorer fulfills that mandate in the Code of Virginia for us, and has now morphed into providing all kinds of other data that you guys might use for your applications. But one relevant part of the data that are in there for this category is what I'm showing here. And I know you can't get much from that, but this basically shows where the rare things are. And it points out that essentially there are rare things all around the state, things that are relevant and worthy of conservation attention. If you want to know more about those, you can find them in your Heritage Data Explorer. And the reason that this focus on rarity is still important is that we've looked at these gray bars represent the amount of acres that have been conserved in 5-year increments since 2005. So if you look at the left side bar, you can see that over 500,000 acres were conserved in that 5-year period. And the yellow bar beside it shows the amount of the acreage of that 500,000+ that actually had one of these rare features on it. And you can see that that's only 3.47%. And for whatever reason, over the last 10 or 15 years, the percentage of land, the actual acreage has been dropping a little bit that's getting protected, but even more importantly, the percentage of the land that's getting protected is getting less and less in terms of having one of these rare things on it. So it further illustrates that rare things are hard to protect, I guess, in some way of thinking about it. So really, where are the rare things and that are being protected in Virginia? And these bars represent some different types of land ownerships, mainly federal and some state agencies. And the bars represent the total number of rare things that are found within those boundaries. And at the top on the left, you can see that, ironically, the State Natural Area Preserve System has more of these rare things within its confines than does any other type of conservation land system in the state, even more so than the National Forest, which is exponentially larger. The State Natural Area Preserve System only has about 66,000 acres, but on those acres, it has a high percentage of rare things, whereas the huge land base that's represented by the National Forest has relatively few. So there is a map of showing the approximate distribution of the 66 natural area preserves, and the pictures that are coming up illustrate that each of those preserves had a core species, or in some cases more than one species, in mind when it was being established. And that gives you a sense of what those things are, from shorebirds and tiger beetles on the coast to freshwater mussels and rare habitats and karst in the west. So coming back to how this fits into VLCF, each project that gets funded in the natural area category, the first thing to really consider is, can that project make a significant contribution to natural heritage resource protection? And I underlined the word significantly, but that whole clause comes right out of the Virginia Code. So minimally, if you don't think you have a natural heritage resource present, if you just think you might, we need to do more work to document whether there is or isn't something there. Because if we're going to say your project is significant to protecting something, we pretty much need to know it's there. The project has to qualify for dedication, and there's some background on that also in the state code. And part of this whole thing hinges on the ability for our staff to evaluate the project. And that typically includes the requirement for a site visit. Some of our colleagues here have asked for people to send prospective projects in early to give sufficient time for the staff to review them, and we'll put that pitch out again to everybody here who's thinking about it. In some ways, maybe our time constraints are even more difficult than others, since we would have to go evaluate the presence perhaps of a rare species that might be difficult to find. And it might have a specific time of the year when it's either blooming or nesting or something like that. And so we don't have an unlimited amount of time and potential to find things. And even though we have staff who can help document most such things, they have busy schedules working on grants and contracts. So it's really important that if you're contemplating something, that you let us know as soon as possible so we can confirm whether there's heritage resources there or not. And the ability to do so implies that we would need to speak to the landowner to get permission to go to the place you're talking about, because it has to be clear that this project is being voluntarily supported by those people. We're not trying to condemn or take over any land to make a natural area preserve there. We want to make sure that the landowner really is behind this idea and wants to do it. So in the end, all this would be taken together to be sufficient to give the program staff here enough information to go ahead and recommend whatever project we're talking about to move forward and be accepted into the natural area category. Back up for 1 second to show you that, again, when we were focusing on the rare elements, when we map those, the map on the right where the little green dollops are, those actually represent places we already know one of these natural heritage resources are present. But the way we map and represent them comes out in what we call conservation sites. So that blue shaded area around those. And you could imagine that we care about everything that happens inside the blue area. But if for some reason you were proposing a project that was inside the blue, but it wasn't directly or imminently protecting the thing in the green, that would be a difficult project to sell to start with. But regardless, on your NHDE, you could look these things up. And this is just a little screenshot from the vicinity of the Richmond area. And in this, you can see the way we've highlighted them here. The blue polygons represent some of those conservation sites. So somewhere inside that blue, those dark blue polygons, there is one or more natural heritage resources that might help a project qualify for the natural area category. Because there's so many of these things, we are doing and have done some prioritizations of those sites. And we use the terms essential versus general. And this is another attribute you can get out of your Natural Heritage Data Explorer. And I'll just quickly show you some of the levels there, but we represent the difference between something that is found in only one place in Virginia, as opposed to things that are found in more locations than that. And you can see there that if it's found in only one location, if we were to be clear about achieving our mandate given to us by the legislature, that single example, if we believe that it's been carefully inventoried and that's the only one we have, that qualifies it as being irreplaceable, since to meet the mandate, it would have to be conserved. Here's a portrayal of that. This is down, I don't know if you can see in the bottom middle of that map. There's Natural Bridge State Park highlighted there, and some of a part of the National Forest and the Short Hills WMA, managed by DWR and Becky's group there. But if you look at the dotted polygons that are outside of those, and in one case, one kind of overlaps Short Hills on the southern end of it, anything that's dotted around it is the edge of one of our so-called conservation sites, meaning somewhere in the middle of it, there are one or more heritage resources present. But if you look at the colorations of those dotted lines, in this case, there's roughly, 9 different aggregations of dotted lines in this particular region. But the most significant ones that you could find in your NHDE have the kind of orangey yellow lines around them. Those are the ones that have met this essentiality criteria. So you might see 2 of them off on the kind of the west side that have yellow around them, things that have really high significance to be protected, but currently are not protected whatsoever, as opposed to some with blue dotted lines that are less important. And these are attributes we can help you with, and you can help find yourself out of the NHDE if you look for it. So if we can document that you have a heritage resource and the landowner is committed and all that, it would move forward to the possibility, and you would need to consider dedicating that property. It's required as part of the VLCF project, but some of the standard provisions that we would put on the deed that will be recorded in perpetuity are the perpetuity clause. If this gets dedicated, this is forever. This commitment stands, and that's why we're so sensitive about it, because every site that gets dedicated as a preserve must stay that way forever. It can't be converted to some other use. Even if something happened to the heritage resource that was there, that property still must stay in the preserve system and be managed as it was originally. So we prohibit incompatible uses, and we have a preserve management guidelines report that we can share that gives examples of what some of those incompatible uses are. But basically, you can think about anything that would not be consistent with perpetuating something like a rare plant, animal, or natural community. Mining, quarrying, building, things like that would generally be considered to be incompatible uses. But of course, that means compatible uses have to be allowed. And we allow things like minimal recreation, nature interpretation, walking trails, and of course, pertinent management activities. If the project is moving forward and it's going to be owned by someone else other than the state, to make sure that we are absolutely on the same page with what needs to take place at that site, we will develop in concert a management plan. And that plan needs to be developed and signed so that DCR understands what you are willing to do and you understand what we think you need to do, and we're all on the same page so there's no surprises. We try to get those developed and signed before everything closes and then funds transfer. And really important to that process is that each applicant must do what's stated there. And this again comes right out of the code. Demonstrate the necessary commitment and financial capability to manage the property and support those heritage resources. And again, all of the property must be dedicated. We can't carve out bits and pieces for other uses like buildings and things like that. And I bring this up because it's such an important point. The threats and the management capacity are very important and again required as part of the code section. And the wording that the code uses is the holder, the body has to have the capability to protect the site from the short-term and long-term stresses to the area. It doesn't define what the stresses are or could be. Those are the things that we have to think about and look at when a site visit takes place. And depending on what those are, that applicant also has to demonstrate the commitment and the financial capability to do what it takes to protect it from those stresses. So down on the bottom, of course, we're showing an interagency fire crew there with some of our friends at DWR and others. That could be one of the things. A stress to certain habitats is fire suppression. If those plants, animals, or natural communities were adapted to fires, we need to be able to abate the threat of suppression by putting fire back on the landscape. And probably everyone on this call understands it's not an easy thing to do. It's expensive, it takes training, takes equipment. So that's the type of example that we're thinking about. Is it possible to restore fire to a place that needs it? And does the applicant have those resources, or can they bring the resources to bear? So it's entirely possible that we might look at a site with you where the stress is just so intense, it may be impossible to abate that threat. And we would just have to talk about that. Or, for example, someone finds a fire adapted site, to follow my example. They think they could burn it, but maybe it's surrounded by houses on all sides, effectively precluding the ability to put fire back into that site. So that's the kind of site that we would probably not want to move forward with because it's kind of inherently unprotectable into the future. So in the end, to gain the recommendation of DCR to get a project to move forward into this category, again, we'll be looking at the significance of the values present, and that really hinges strongly on the natural heritage resource present. Possibilities of something being there aren't good enough. We have some models that predict the possible occurrence of certain natural heritage resources. So you can look at those and you can indicate that the model says they could be there, but this project, the way it's set up, is to rely on things that actually are there. So if you think it's a possibility, again, get with us as soon as possible so that those inventories can be done and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the thing that you're talking about is actually there. And many things we already know about. I showed you examples. We have things mapped statewide all over the state. So look for those. It could be well that we already know that something's on the project you're talking about from past inventories. So look at those, but also look at the essentiality ranking. And if someone's not clear on how to find that in their NHDE, they can contact us. We also base things on the state and global rarity of the resource that's present, the ecological integrity, and again, going back to the site viability. those stressors that we were talking about and the capability to abate those. That will feature heavily into this. And I just can't reiterate enough the importance of a site visit and the landowner contact. We've talked about this, so I won't go deeper, but we got to get out there. And in the end, they're all in your scoring manual, but the biodiversity significance brings you the most points, and those elements are split up in the scoring manual. I won't go into exactly how they are, but you can see them in the manual. That's how it goes. And then the integrity is also part of it. And every one of these things, those top two criteria, you can get straight out of NHD. And if you have any questions, ask us about it. And then there's the rest of it, how you can get the points. And it just brings up, again, if you don't have it, get access to the Natural Heritage Data Explorer, and you can find, you see all the little click boxes on the left. If you're not sure which ones to click or where to find the pertinent information, you can ask Gina, or you can ask us in our little part of the world. And we certainly want you to apply, but let us know as soon as possible, because in the end, biodiversity is in, the preservation of it is in all of our hands together. So hopefully you can bring some good projects to bear.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Are there any questions for Rob? All right. So Crystal McKelvey is next. She's gonna bring us home with the open spaces and parks category.
So open space and parks category, I'm Crystal McKelvey. I'm the Chief Recreation Grants Manager in the DCR Division of Planning and Recreation Resources. I'm glad to see you all here, and thank you for letting me present today about this category. The applications for this category are for public recreational and open space projects. So that's the priority, is to provide outdoor public recreation. So there's a continued high demand for public access sites for water-based recreation throughout the Commonwealth. So the first scoring criteria in this category does relate to public access to state waters that offer recreation. This can include boating, fishing, swimming, and viewing. The maximum amount in this category, in this section, is 10 points, and it is additive. Next. The next part is related to the project location. If this creates a new outdoor recreational opportunity where there was not one already, or whether it expands existing parks and public conservation areas with a focus on recreation. Creating a new outdoor recreational area gives you more points with a maximum of 10. Expanding gives you 5. Next one. Another important part of public outdoor recreation is to have access to scenic resources. So these properties for open space and parks can also be a way to protect scenic viewsheds or lands important to the protection of designated or proposed scenic resources. These can include many different resources, and a list is here, including those designated wild and scenic rivers, both statewide and federally, American Heritage Rivers, Virginia's Program for Scenic Rivers, Scenic Roads, and Virginia Byways. Also, the variety of statewide connecting trails we have, and the greenways, blueways. These can be found on the next page on the Virginia Outdoors Plan Mapper. These scenic resources are additive for a maximum of 10 points. The Virginia Outdoors Plan Mapper is live on the DCR PRR website. And there's a screenshot here that shows you the layer list that you can click on or off. Scenic rivers, for example, statewide trails and blueways are checked on, and you can zoom with the address or locality name up in the search bar. You can zoom to your area and then toggle those layers on or off to see more about your resources. You can also hit the triangle drop down and it'll explain, like, scenic rivers has designated and proposed. So do look out for those differences. Next, please. The fourth scoring criteria has to do with local or regional plans. Frequently, localities, cities, towns, and others, planning district commissions as well, have regional plans that contribute to the comprehensive planning for recreation and conservation. So in the VLCF application, we do ask for links or information about whether your project has already been mentioned in one of these documents. Please do not send the whole document. We really just want, perhaps if it's on a website, you can give us the link and exactly what to read, or you can also just PDF the page that pertains to it and the name of the document so that we could go back and find it if necessary. So again, if this project contributes to protection of an identified conservation corridor in local or regional plans, then that can contribute to up to 15 points. There is a difference between whether it's specifically mentioned, that would be 15 points. If it's generally mentioned, that would be 10 points. Or it could go down to 5 points if it's just a general goal. So the scoring committee will have that to determine. Next page, please. The next set of criteria is related to the Virginia Outdoors Plan. Currently, the 2018 is still the one we will be using for this VLCF round. This is the official outdoor recreation and land conservation plan that we must have on hand to participate in the Land and Water Conservation Fund from the National Park Service. And of course, we use in many different grant programs. We are working on the update. It'll be for the 2024 VOP. And we are actually past the survey point, it says here, and we are nearly at the point of releasing for public comment. We've been working diligently behind the scenes for that. So on the next page, you'll use the 2018 Virginia Outdoors Plan to answer what your project addresses as a needed recreation value. So the scoring is additive, and you can see here that there are 6 different bullet points of what has been determined as high needs from that survey for that 2018 Virginia Outdoors Plan. So the scoring is additive, including access to natural areas or developed parks, walking or water trails, access also to historic areas, and then biking and equestrian trails, or there are other needs identified in the VOP. The maximum is 10 points. They are slightly variable based on the highest desire from the public, which is determined by the next page, survey summary pulled from the 2018 VOP. So this is the general overall most needed outdoor recreation opportunities that we follow when we set the scores. And you can also continue to look through the VOP. There's regional sections that may be of interest that you can pull information from as well. All right, so category or the 6th part of scoring the outdoor space and parks category relates to the public utilization. So this is the actual availability of the land for public use. The uses of that land can include, but not limited to, hunting, fishing, wildlife watching. But this is really just based on how many days or year of the year the property will be open to the public. It is preferred that it's 365 days a year, including if that has to be for passive outdoor recreation. The max would be 10 points for that. But there are cases where the land would need to be not available for that many days, but it would be less points. Number 7 has to do with providing outdoor resources to an underserved community. We do have several different ways to determine that data. VIMS has a tool that is called the Social Vulnerability Index, but there are data from other resources that could be considered for this criterion. The maximum is 15 points, and I'll walk you through a couple of the different tools. The next slide shows the Virginia Vulnerability Viewer. And this is a mapping tool that there's a link and there's a couple directions in the VLCF manual that you can go to determine the social vulnerability of an area. You can zoom to your park, locality, or address search. And then please be sure to check the second layer. First comes up the classification, but what we're really looking for is the index score. And there are a lot of tools to use in this application, and I just want you to know that the scoring committee will be looking these up to verify them. So if you get them, quote, wrong, we'll make sure to correct that value as we go. All right, number 8 is recreation need, and this will also use some viewing mapping tools. So there is a DCR-based recreation access model. Next page, please, Gina. Yeah. And so these can be found on the Natural Heritage Data Explorer that you've heard other colleagues here talk about. There's both a land-based and a water-based opportunity. It does depend on your park and what your opportunity is for outdoor recreation. Or, next slide, there is also a this is a visual of the nature-based recreation access model, land-based. So you go into the Natural Heritage Data Explorer and scroll down until you find these layers, and then you can subclick to see if you're in the brown, that would be number 5, very high need, down to a 1, dark green is very low, and you can toggle the water on, water-based or land-based for those answers. And then the next slide. We also offer the opportunity for land-based or nature-based to use this other website, public website that the Trust for Public Lands has created called ParkServe. This is especially more useful if you're dealing with a more populated town or city, and it can be a very helpful tool to be able to see about parks that are within a 10-minute walk or other metrics and planning uses as well. It will show priority areas for new parks. That's what's showing here in purple. Okay, then we move on to the Conserve Virginia category. Like other categories, this is about whether it's within a Conserve Virginia and if it will be open to the public on a daily basis. It will be based on the percent of parcel intersecting the layer, and the maximum value is 10 points here. All right, so that wraps up the open space and parks category. Just wanted to tell you a lot of times these grants can kind of intersect. So right now in the Planning and Recreation Resources Division, we have a group email if you have any questions. Kelly Seaton can answer a lot of them, or I can too, but just funnel them all to recreationgrants@dcr.virginia.gov for open space and parks. Or you can contact Sue first or reach out to us. And then anything related to land and water or recreational trails programs, you can reach out as well. So Land and Water Conservation Fund closed, and moving forward 8 applications. This can be for the development of projects if people are interested in that. The Recreational Trails Program closed recently. We had 29 applications and funding 7, so that continues to be highly competitive. Thank you very much. That concludes my part.
Thank you so much, Crystal. All right, I know we have at least
Sorry.
one question. Let's see. Is that from Lisa? Hey, let's see. Apologies if this has already been shared. Is there a way to reference the total point scores of winning proposals from past years? Yes. We have posted the meeting materials for the board in the past. So that is public record, the spreadsheets of all of the scores. And if you'd like that, just shoot me an email and I can send that to you. It's very bulky to put it on the website, so I think you'd have to ask for it to know what you're getting. So no problem. Are there any other questions? Thank you guys so much. I'm sorry that this all went a little long with our fumbling on our end. But thank you all very much. We really look forward to getting some great applications once again. And we look forward to working with you all.